In this section of the course, we're going to be taking a look at a special type of data structure called an array. So far, all of the data types that we've explored have been pretty plain, pretty primitive. They can only store one piece of data. For example, a variable that is a string can only store one string. A variable that is a double can only store a single number. An array is a special data structure because it can store multiple objects of the same type. You can think of it as a container or a box that can store more than one value at a time. In fact, the values are also going to be stored in sequence, in a specific order. So an array is a convenient way that we can store several values without assigning each one of those values to a separate variable. It kind of allows us to create a box from scratch and then put values within that box in a specific order. Now, the values within an array are called elements or items, and whenever we put these elements or items into an array, they're each assigned what we call an index position or an index. The index simply represents the element's position within the array, its place in line relative to the other elements within the array. Here's, however, where it gets really confusing, especially for people who are not so familiar with programming. Array indices start counting at 0, not 1, which means the first element or item that we add to an array is going to be marked with the number 0. We start counting at the beginning with 0. The next item, the second item, is going to be an index position of 1. The third item is going to have an index position of 2, and so on. So when we start adding these items or elements into the array, they start counting at 0, which can be a little bit confusing. All right, so let's take a look. In this lesson, I just want to create a very simple array in my Visual Basic Editor. We're just going to create an array of 4 items and then add several values into it, and then take a look at how we can actually access those values from inside the array. I'll begin by declaring a procedure called myFirstArray. And the syntax to actually declare an array is going to be somewhat familiar. We're going to begin with the dim keyword, and then we're going to give our array a name. And let's say I want an array to have the 4 seasons, 4 strings to represent the 4 seasons of the year. The next thing after the dim keyword is going to be the name. In this case, this is the name of the array. And here's where it gets special. Here's the special syntax to actually create an array, because otherwise this would just be a plain variable holding one data type. Immediately after the name, I create a pair of parentheses like so. And in the parentheses, I put the upper bound. And the upper bound is going to be the last index position of the array. So if I want 4 items within my seasons array, I'm actually going to put the number 3 here. Again, this is really confusing for a lot of beginners because they see the syntax and they think, oh, this array is going to have 3 items in it. But this is not the count of items in the array. This is the final max index position, and remember that the index starts counting at 0. The first item in the array is granted a position in line of 0. So if we have a number of 3 here, that's our max index position. We're going to have a total of 4 items, and they're going to have the index position 0, 1, 2, 3. That's 4 total numbers, okay? So we're going to have an array of 4 values or 4 elements. Afterwards, we put an as keyword, and then we actually put the data type. This is what we're pretty much used to by now. So if I want an array of strings, I'm just going to put string. So this is actually an array data type. So what we're specifying here is the data type of each element within the array. All 4 of our elements will be strings. All right. Now that I've declared the array, what I can do is actually start adding on elements to it. The way I do that is I reference the array. That's in our seasons variable. Then in parentheses, I specify the index position that I want to write a specific value to. So as I mentioned, the very first item is going to have an index position of 0. So if I want to add something at the beginning of the array, I can just put 0 in parentheses, and then an equal sign, and then the actual string that I want to assign at that position to be the first in line. So I'm going to assign a string of summer, and let's continue on here. We're going to have seasons. The next index position is going to be 1, and I can assign that a string of something like fall. The next index position is going to be 2, and let's assign that a season of winter. And the final index position 3 is going to be spring. So notice again that we have a total of 4 items, but the last index position is 3 because we're starting the count at 0. In fact, this is a very convenient logical tip that you can use, which is if you want to figure out how many items there are in an array, it's always going to be 1 more than the last index position. And in reverse, if you want to find out the last index position of an array, it's always going to be 1 less than the total number of items within the array. All right, so now we have an array. We can basically use it in whichever way we want. We can write these values to our spreadsheet. We can take a look at them here. We can iterate over the entire array, which we'll take a look at in a couple lessons and show you how we can manipulate each value within the array. But now we've created one data container. Instead of having to assign these 4 strings to 4 separate variables, we've assigned them to one container, which we call an array, and each item is now going to have its own position. I can very easily access any one of those items now by simply using the syntax we see above, but without the equal sign. So for example, if I want to print out the value winter, I can do something like this: debug print. Seasons is my array, and then I want to reference an item from within the array. We can't reference the item by what its value actually is, so I can't do something like winter, but we can access an item by its index position, by its place in line. So winter is in index position 2, it is the 3rd item, so I can access it like so. And when I execute this code with F5, we're going to see winter right here. That's all there is to cover in this lesson. We created a basic array. This is actually what we call a fixed size or a static array, which means it has a max number of elements. That's what we're specifying right here, the total number of elements that this array can hold. So I can't keep adding on elements after this point because we've already filled it up to its max. However, we still can overwrite these elements if we want. But this is a fixed size or static array because it is fixed in its place. We can't expand it or shrink it. It has to have only a max number of elements, which in this case is 4, but you could put whatever number you want here. Once we declare the array, we declare what data type each value or element will hold. Then we assign values to the array using the syntax, using the parentheses, and then referencing the index position. And then once those values are assigned, we can go ahead and access them with the same syntax. That's all there is to cover in this lesson, so I'll see you in the next one.